Topwater lures are one of the funnest lures to throw because you see the explosion. If you want to know which ones to throw and when to throw, stay tuned. My name's Weston Littlefield with YourBassGuy.com, and today we're talking all about topwater lures. I'm going to discuss the top 6 that are most commonly thrown and my favorites. I'm going to give you the very detailed explanation of when to throw them, how to throw them, everything you need to know so that you start catching more bass with a topwater. First up is a buzzbait. I love throwing a buzzbait because they're loud, they're obnoxious, they're easy to cast, and they're relatively not a lot to them as far as understanding a specific technique. You know, you're going to throw it out there and you're going to reel it back and make sure it's on top of the water making noise. With that said, usually you want to reel it as slow as you can get away with while keeping it on top of the water, just to give that fish, annoy that fish a little bit more time. But sometimes they do want it really fast. Now, talk about what a buzzbait is. It's just a wire bait, very similar to a spinnerbait. And instead of having blades like a spinnerbait would, it's got kind of blades too. But they spin in a circle and they chop the water and make a lot of noise. You tie it on right here. You're going to see a little hump in the wire. You're going to tie it on right there. And some guys don't like throwing a skirt. Some will put on like a frog, or they'll put on, they call them like a chunk frog. There's different variations. Sometimes they just put on a creature bait, whatever it is. Sometimes they don't always have the skirt on it, but that's what it pretty much will look like coming out of the box. There are other variations that have like a clicker that hangs down here, and when it hits, it just makes more noise. Those are actually some of my favorite to throw just because I feel like they get more bites. When to throw a buzzbait. You throw a buzzbait really when it's a little bit cloudy and maybe the water has just a slight ripple on it. We're not talking like big choppy waves, but a nice ripple to obscure the bait a little bit, and it makes it harder for the bass to really see what it is. And so if it's just annoying it, then it's going to come up and bite it. Versus if it can see what it is and it's got longer time to think about it, sometimes, most of the time, they won't always work. So let's talk a little bit about where to throw a buzzbait. I love a buzzbait because they really don't get hung up. Now, with that said, I've been hung up with a buzzbait before, so you throw it into a brush pile, probably not the best idea. But if it's just submerged, you can throw it over the top of grass, you can throw it over the top of brush piles. There's no bad place to throw a buzzbait except for like into the brush pile where it's going to get hung up real bad. Another thing is that if you cast it into the grass and it sinks down and gets in the grass, these will spin and the grass gets tangled up in it and it's not very good. So what you really want to do is cast along the edge of the grass and bring it into the grass on top of the water. In lily pads, it's not very good. I wouldn't use it in lily pads because the lily pads just hit it and it doesn't get the correct action that it needs to trigger that strike. So anything that you're throwing it over open water, along flats is good, but anything that's floating on top of the water, it's not going to be very good. Now, like throwing it up along the edge of a dock would be better, and if you can skip it up in there and reel it fast enough, then more power to you, but more than likely it's going to be like along the edges of the dock, riprap, flats, that kind of thing. Lastly, we'll talk about how to throw it. As I mentioned, it's a really simple lure to throw. That's why I really like it. You're going to cast it out there, and your best bet is to stop it right before it hits the water and start reeling right as soon as it hits the water. Otherwise, it's going to sink down and it's going to take longer to get back to the top of the water, and you're not going to get as many bites because it's not doing its thing until it's on top of the water. And with that said, you're going to have to reel it pretty quick usually and play with that speed a little bit because you want to reel it as slow as you can get away with some days. Some days they just want you burning it and just as fast as you can reel, and they hammer it. How to fish a buzzbait is really simple. There's not a lot to it. The Whopper Plopper is next. This is a lure that's come into popularity really within the last 5-10 years, something like that. It's been around for a little while. It's very similar to a buzzbait, except for you'll see that it's got treble hooks and it actually floats. I honestly like a Whopper Plopper most of the time better than a Buzzbait because treble hooks have a better hookup ratio and it floats, so you don't got to worry about it sinking. You can cast and let it sit there for a second and then start reeling. But let's talk about what a Whopper Plopper is. It's very similar to a crankbait. You'll see it's got like the hard plastic body. It's got a little fin here, or a blade, whatever you want to call that. And then it's got one treble hook, two treble hooks, and then you're gonna tie your line onto the front. They come in all kinds of different colors and shapes and sizes. They're popular with all kinds of even different species, not just bass. So don't be surprised if you catch a few other fish when you're bass fishing with a Whopper Plopper. When do you fish a Whopper Plopper? Kind of the same time as like when you would a Buzzbait, except maybe a little bit calmer. You still want the little bit of the ripples on the water, but relatively calm. You're gonna want at least a little bit of an overcast day, and if you don't have overcast, you definitely want those ripples on the water. This is much better for a little less cloudy days, where I'd really want a fairly cloudy day with a Buzzbait. I'm gonna use this on a little bit more sunny days. Where to fish a Whopper Plopper is gonna be quite a bit different than where you would fish a Buzzbait, and that's because of the treble hooks. I'm not gonna wanna throw this into grass unless it's fully submerged. I'm not gonna wanna throw this over brush piles unless it's fully submerged, where you can throw a Buzzbait over a lay down and bring it over it and it's not gonna get hung up. You can't do that with a Whopper Plopper. You can throw it along the edge of it and along the edge of the grass, but this just gets hung up too much. So if you think that you might get hung up in anything, it's more than likely probably not the best to use this. Now, with that said, I think that over rocks and flats and over submerged grass, as long as it's deeper than the treble hooks, those are some of the best places to throw a Whopper Plopper. They actually have a little bit different sound than a Buzzbait. So if you're getting some that are swiping at a Buzzbait, but they're not fully committing, you might try a Whopper Plopper and see. If not, then go to like a spinnerbait even. Back to the Whopper Plopper, it's really killer anywhere you're not gonna get hung up, I guess I should say, because of those treble hooks. Lastly, on the Whopper Plopper, how to fish it. This one is a little bit different than the Buzzbait too, because you can reel it, stop it really fast, stop it, kind of work it like a popper. Because that it floats, you have a little bit wider variety of how to fish it. Fish it really slow, fish it really fast, like I said, pop it. There's several different ways to fish this. For that reason, it's a little more versatile. The next topwater lure is one of my favorites, the hollow body frog. The hollow body frog just seems to get bites. Now with that said, I probably miss more bites with the hollow body frog too, simply because these big hooks don't have the best hookup ratio all the time. Now, what is a hollow body frog? It's kind of a soft, squishy, feeling rubbery plastic. It's got two hooks here you can see that run along the sides of the body. Sometimes they've got a pointed nose like this. Sometimes they've got a popping nose, which is just like a concave hole. And then of course they've got like the skirt material on the bottom. Sometimes it's all the way across. Sometimes it's just the two legs like this. They come in all kinds of different variations of colors, and they're killer. You're gonna fish a frog pretty much anytime that it's calm enough for the bass to register that there's commotion on top. Because like, especially with a popping frog, you're not so much imitating a frog as you are an injured bait fish. So you want the bass to be able to see, oh hey, there's something going on here that looks like food, I'm gonna go eat it. And so when to fish it is, once again, cloudy days kind of work better, but this also works on sunny days. I've caught a lot of fish on sunny days, partly cloudy days, with a little bit of chop on the water. Now if it's just blowing 100 miles an hour, the frog's not gonna be your bet. The water's just gonna be too chaotic for a fish to find this. Where to fish a frog? One of the best things about a frog is that they really very little get hung up. I mean, you have to really try to get it to hang up to get hung up. So with that said, you can throw these in the thickest, nastiest stuff, and 99% of the time you're gonna get it back or you're gonna get bait. And that's why I love a frog. I mean, we're talking thick lily pads, we're talking weeds, up into brush piles, popping it out of brush piles. We're talking along the banks, out in open water, a popper frog's really good. Along riprap, there's also a good popping frog, or even a pointed nose frog. Frogs are pretty good anywhere. I would say there's better options if they're not biting the popping frog in open water. There are better options to go to, but overall, the frog can be fished pretty much anywhere because it's so anti-snag. The frog is also very versatile. That's why I don't really want to say how to fish it, other than a pointed nose frog is usually a little bit better for fishing it, like a little bit of popping it, reel it, let it set, pop it some more. It's just gonna have a little bit different action, and you really want the frog to walk back and forth in place. That's really what a pointed nose frog will do. Pop here, give it a little slack, and the commotion will have it set sideways, and you pop it again, and it has slack. It tries to set in one place, basically, and that will trigger a lot of bites. Now, with a popping frog, you're gonna pop it, and it will set and walk in one place too, but generally it's that popping commotion that gets the attention of the fish, and not so much just the motion of the lure itself. If you want to know more about frogs, we've got a video that I'll leave in the description below. Otherwise, let's move on to bait number 4. Number 4 of our best topwater lures is the plastic frog. I absolutely love fishing these. Now, a plastic frog is basically what it sounds like. It's like a soft plastic, like a worm soft plastic, or a creature bait. It's got little paddle feet here, kind of like you would on a swim bait paddle tail. It's a killer bait. It kind of mimics like a buzzbait and a Whopper Plopper in a sense, because these paddle tail feet make that plopping kind of annoying sound, and that's what gets the bass's attention. You can throw this most weather conditions. Obviously, you're gonna want the frogs to be out. You know, you want the water temperature to be that warm where you're hearing frogs or you're seeing frogs. That's when you're gonna want to throw it. Sunny days aren't always the best fishing days in general, but as long as it's partly cloudy or mostly cloudy, then I would recommend throwing this. This is kind of like a hollow body frog as well, in the sense that it doesn't get hung up very easily. If you rig it properly, you can throw it in the thickest, nastiest stuff and it comes through there with ease. The one thing about throwing it in the thickest, nasty stuff is that vegetation or the brush pile doesn't actually allow it to have the proper action. So I tend to throw it up along the edge of the grass line, of the weed line, of lily pad line, whatever, along the edge of the brush pile. That way these feet can hit the water and make their natural action that actually triggers the bites. This is another super easy lure to throw. It doesn't sink as fast as a buzzbait, so you can cast it out there, not be worried about having to really get back and start cranking it, but it does sink, so you do have to cast it out there and get it back to the top of the water for it to work properly. That's all you do with these for the most part, is cast it out there and reel it back on top of the water. You can change your reel speeds a little bit, you know, if they're wanting a little bit slower, a little bit faster, kind of like a buzzbait, like a Whopper Plopper. Yes, you can sometimes let it set, especially if you notice that he's swiping at it. You might let it set and sink down and reel it up. Sometimes that will trigger a bite. I've also rigged these on like a swim jig sometimes, just to help it set higher up in the water column. I've put these on buzzbaits too, so kind of combining the two, where it helps the buzzbait stay on top of the water and it gives it a little bit extra commotion. That's probably one of the main reasons why I love these, is just how versatile it is. But that is number 4, the soft plastic frog. Number 5 on topwater lures, and that is the popper. It's similar to what the frog would be, but generally they're a little slenderer, they're a little bit smaller profiled. You can get bigger poppers. Sometimes they've got like a little fly for a tail. Generally speaking, they've got treble hooks here. You tie it on to the eye here, and they come in all kinds of different colors, variations, like I said, sizes. Some of them have rattles. Throwing the plopper is gonna be about the same as like what you would with a frog. It's gonna have to be relatively calm, a little bit of a ripple on the water, a little bit overcast, or right at the break of, you know, early morning before the sun gets up and hot and bearing down on the water. That's when you would throw a popper. Now, because it's got treble hooks, once again, I'm not gonna throw it around brush piles. I'm not gonna throw it up into lily pads. I'm gonna throw it along the edge of the weed line, maybe down along the side of the docks, open water on a flat, along riprap, that kind of thing. I'm not gonna throw this where it can get hung up, because it's got treble hooks, just like the Whopper Plopper. Fishing this is going to be very similar to fishing the hollow body frog plopper. You're going to want to cast it out there, pop it, try to make it walk back and forth as much as you can. If you can get it to set in one place, that's even better, and just keep popping it and making it set in one place. But you're not gonna wanna just cast it out there and retrieve it back. That's not what this bait was designed to do. You're gonna wanna cast it out there and pop it. Jerk it a little bit, let it set, reel up your slack, jerk it a little bit, let it set, maybe jerk it a little bit more, reel up your slack, that kind of thing. And that is the popper. The sixth and final lure, topwater lure that is, that we're gonna talk about today is a spook. I actually don't have a spook on me, surprisingly, but I did have this little old prop bait that's similar to a spook in shape, but it just wouldn't have these blades on it. But it will have treble hooks generally, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, depending on the size, all kinds of different colors. It's a hard bait. It's similar to like a jerk bait, what a jerk bait would look like. It just doesn't have the bill, and it's designed to float on top of the water. It's gonna be like all top waters. You're gonna need it a little bit of ripple, maybe calm. You're not gonna want the sun shining real super bright, maybe early morning if it's supposed to be a sunny day. But if it's cloudy, a little bit cloudy and calm, then that's when you're gonna wanna throw a spook. Since they generally have treble hooks, you're gonna wanna stay away from anything that it can get hung up on. As long as it's floating above any kind of structure, any kind of vegetation, any kind of brush piles, anything like that, you're good, because it does float, it doesn't sink. But you're not gonna wanna throw it up into a brush pile or into lily pads, anything like that. Generally speaking, it's really good in open water. So out on a flat that you know that the fish are pushing up to feed, that's when this will excel. How to fish it. Very similar to a plopper in the fact that you're gonna wanna cast it out there and pop it back and make it walk back and forth. You're not gonna wanna cast it out there and reel it back. Generally speaking, with all topwaters, you're gonna wanna give that fish a second when you see that bite, because if you don't, you're just gonna jerk it right out of its mouth. It hasn't had time to actually close down and get a hold of that bait. Most of the time we see it coming up and it's hitting the bait, and that's when we set the hook and we actually jerk it away from the fish before it gets a hold of it. And that's why we miss so many bites. Honestly, why I miss a lot of bites with a hollow body frog is because I set the hook too soon. You wanna give it to like a count of just 1 Mississippi. You don't wanna wait forever for it to feel like, hey, this isn't the bait, but you also don't want to jerk it out of its mouth too soon. So generally speaking, about 1 Mississippi, you might have to play with that depending on how good the fish are biting, and if you have treble hooks or not. Sometimes the treble hooks, you can set the hook a little earlier just because you've got more chances of hooking that fish. Now, if you guys like videos like this on how to choose which lure to use in which situation, then we've actually got a cheat sheet for you down in the comments. It's free to download. Go check it out. It breaks it down for you. Otherwise, always remember that education is important, but fishing is essential.